For this first session, what we're going to do is we're going to jump in and we're going to start programming some drum timbres. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to look to build ourselves a part of a drum kit that we can then mix in with some samples to create our full own personal professional drum kit that we can then use in later sessions to program a number of drum loops. Now, from the start, when I'm mentioning programming drum timbres, I need to mention here that not all synthesizers can produce drum timbres, and you need to face that fact. If you've watched the synthesis DVD, you'll already know that synthesizers tend to be specific, with some better than others at creating certain timbres than others. So basically, it's exactly the same case with the drums. For those who haven't watched the synthesis DVD yet, apart from saying that you should because it's fantastic, what I'm basically saying is that you can't expect to produce the warmest analog tones on a very digital synth. It's why analog gear still sells today. So in that same respect, don't think you can just jump in on any synth and start knocking out drum timbres that will rock the dance floor, because you'll be wasting your time. For example, I mean, a kick drum, it is built on pitch modulation, but it has to be a very specific pitch modulation. The fact is, some synthesizers just simply can't do that. The envelopes just simply aren't fast enough. More importantly, though, a proportionate amount of synthesizers don't have exponential envelopes, and that is absolutely imperative for programming drum timbres, as you'll find out when we start programming. So the fact is, you want to program drum timbres, you need a drum synth. Now, there's no excuse not to own one. There's plenty of drum synths available now, both software and hardware, and you'll find that every professional artist will have access to some kind of drum synth, if not a number of them. So if you haven't got one, you should be asking yourself why you haven't got one. You're looking to produce dance music, and you don't own the most fundamental weapon you could possibly have in your arsenal. I mean, by buying this DVD saying that you want to make music to professional standards, so take what you're doing seriously. I mean, you can put in a screw with the tip of a kitchen knife, but face facts, it's a lot easier and more professional if you just use a screwdriver. So if you haven't got a drum synth, get one. And on that note, while we're talking about tools, one of the most useful processes you can have in your arsenal when it comes to building a good rhythm is a good transient designer. If you've seen any of the previous DVDs, you'll have seen just how important they are, and I've little doubt I'm going to be using it here quite a bit too. I always do. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, when it comes to programming drums, I tend to use Ultrabeat. It's simply an excellent drum synthesizer with exponential envelopes, tuning, filters and so forth. And if you run Logic, I fully recommend getting to know Ultrabeat and using that. Now, having said that, I'm positive I'm going to have a lot of Cubase, Sonar, Ableton users just absolutely screaming at the monitor now. Yes, it is Logic only. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to avoid using it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Waldorf Attack that you can see here now. This is available on both Mac and PC platforms, so I can't get any complaints. But if you don't have it, or you can't get hold of it, or whatever, remember, it's just a drum synthesizer, and that means it shares the exact same parameters as every other drum synthesizer on the planet. So if you don't own this, you can simply translate what I'm doing into your own drum synth. Now, despite what you may have heard, I must stress that it isn't absolutely necessary to program every single drum timbre on a drum synth, and there's nothing wrong with taking all the percussive samples from a sample CD. Although it is great to have your own personal kit, which is what we will be creating. There's nothing wrong with using sample CDs to augment your kit. You only really need to program kick drums, and that's just to ensure that you have the body and presence that a lot of sample CDs are missing. The reason for this is because the kick is the most important element of the rhythm. It's basically a heartbeat of the music, and it does so much more than simply define a tempo. It also defines the groove and the movement of the record. It can either make your track or just totally destroy it. But I mean, saying that, you can, of course, if you want, feel free to program every single drum timbre if you really, really feel the need to. And for the benefit of those that do, I'll certainly find the time to program some timbres later. But But most of our time here is going to be spent concentrating on building a kick drum because, as I've said, it's the most important timbre in your music. And you're actually just about to find out just how simple it is to build a drum timbre on a drum synth, because it's incredibly simple. Now, the first thing we need to do when we're building a kick drum is we need to examine a kick. What we're going to do is we're going to build a deep-bodied house kick that could easily be used for any other genre with just a little bit of editing. But for this example, to show you how it's done, we're going to build a deep-bodied kick. And basically, that consists of three basic elements. We have the bass wave, which we could also call it the lower body. It's the boom, the bass, the bottom, or the weight of the kick. It's the part that gives the kick its depth, the part that makes the speakers move in and out with the energy of the kick. And on top of that, we have what's known as the body of the kick, and we call it the chest kick. It's the part that you feel in your chest every time the kick hits. It's that thud. If you've been close to a commercial PA system while it's playing, you'll know exactly what I mean by that. It's like being hit in the chest with a rolled up newspaper on every beat. And then finally, we have the upper end energy. I know this partly contributes to the thud you feel in the chest, but it's more concentrated towards the upper end energy that helps it pull through a mix. Now, if you've watched the synthesis DVD, you'll already hopefully be practicing this, and if you're not, why not? Come on, you should be practicing this. But when you're programming timbres, you should always try and keep an FFT open somewhere. Not only does it begin to help you identify frequencies, but it will help you in producing good timbres. As I mentioned in the synthesis, you can examine timbres with an FFT, and then you can try and replicate that. As you progress and you become more proficient, you will find that you need to rely on it less and less, but they are incredibly useful when you're first starting out. Now, I've got an FFT here. If you've seen the synthesis DVD, you're going to recognise this already. It's the AP EQ. EQ isn't that great, but the FFT is fantastic. It's a really good FFT, so I would recommend using this as an FFT. Of course, you can use any FFT, but I do like the AP EQ. Now, a good heavy chest thudding dance kit will have specific frequency activity that basically we want to replicate. Now, what we're after constructing is a kick with a frequency range with energy at between 50 to 80 hertz, followed by a slight frequency hump around 100 to 250, and after that a final fourth frequency gain anywhere between 300 to 800 hertz. Now, where this final frequency lies will determine the overall timbre of the kick. Lower frequencies, if we move down to like 300, 400, they produce more of a clubby, housey kick, whereas if we use higher frequencies such as 600, we're more attributed to minimal techno. So obviously it all depends on the type of sound that you want to accomplish. Now, whatever body frequency you want to choose, basically after that, what it should do is, after our top high-end energy frequency there, it should slowly roll down on a fairly linear slope, reducing with no spikes whatsoever in the frequency range. So what we're looking for is basically a shape like that. That's the type of shape we're looking for. Now, the thing is, we can't reproduce that type of frequency using just one instrument. And the mistake a lot of people make is to build a poor kick or sample a poor kick, or even just use a sampled kick, actually. 99% of them are very poor. And then just rely on EQ to try and give it some weight, and then throw compressors over it to try and give it more body. Well, I do know some professional producers actually do this, or at least they say they do it. But in my opinion, it's an incredibly unprofessional and lazy approach. You can spend your time shifting around the frequency range, randomly boosting and try out some energy, but boosting frequencies that don't really exist, or those that are incredibly low in volume, you're only going to end up raising the noise floor, and what it does is just create one hell of a messy sounding kick. And even if you do manage to build some kind of timbre from it, it's going to cause you a number of problems during the mixdown stage. So the more professional approach, which a lot of producers use, and I know this, is they layer a number of instruments together, and then what we tend to do is we tend to process those results to produce the final timbre. Now, before we move on here, I should make one thing absolutely clear. Whilst the good kit uses these specific frequency ranges that I've just discussed, don't disclude your ears. Don't discount them. I mean, your ears are the most important factor. We're using an FFT because, well, I doubt many of you are actually sat using mastering monitors in front of you, or you're currently sat in a treated room. Therefore, we do have to put some reliance on this FFT to do the job of what our monitors basically can't accurately reproduce. But having said that, at the end of the day, your ears must make the final decisions. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this FFT away for the moment because, well, basically, I've been producing now for like 20 years, so I don't really need to rely on this. But more importantly, so we can concentrate on the instruments, because it does tend to get in the way. I can throw it over to my other monitors, but I can't record them. So what we'll do is we'll put that away for now. We'll call it up later, but I want to concentrate on this. I want to zoom in on this with the camera so you can have a good look at what I'm doing and how we're creating this sound. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by producing the peak of the bass wave. Now, by that I mean what we're going to do is we're going to start by building the fundamental frequency of our bass wave, and as I mentioned, this should occur between 50 to 80 hertz. At these frequencies, it's low enough for the club monitors to reproduce without creating distortion or affecting the loudness of your music. Now, of course, fundamental frequency at 50 hertz is going to be pretty much indecipherable, but you don't really want to pitch much lower than 50 or 40, because as soon as you start playing around 30, you're touching on the limits of PA systems, and as the system tries to reproduce frequencies that it can, it steals the bandwidth of the speakers and your track falls apart. But I suspect you already know that from reading the dance music manual, because I do stress on that point, as I've found out in my earlier years. What I would recommend this is, before we start, you put some headphones on, because I'm going to be making some small changes to these timbres, and it's best if you've got headphones on because you'll be able to hear it closer. So we want a sine wave oscillator for that. And basically what we need to do is, if we listen to that now, it's a bit high, so what we need to do is we'll tune that down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tune it to... We'll go with E1. Now, that's a bit better there. Now, believe it or not, kick drums have a specific key, or at least a specific note. So when you're working on them, it's absolutely imperative that the bass wave, which is, well, what we're essentially going to be creating here, is in key with your bass line when you write the track, because we're working at low frequencies. It's difficult to identify the fundamental, and obviously that means it's difficult to identify pitch. But I can't stress enough that the kick has to be in the same key as the bass. And although it is hard to tell, just here now with the headphones on, it's amazing how obvious it becomes when it's played back on a club system. When the PA starts pumping out the track, you can immediately hear if there's dissonance in the bottom end, and if there is, your track just doesn't stand up, and it sounds, well, it just sounds bloody horrible. Now, basically, I've tuned to E there. That doesn't mean I have to write my bass using the note of E. It just means I have to ensure I use a key with the note of E in it, so that the track remains in harmony. I mean, of course, you don't have to tune to E. You tune to any key you want to, but I like the deep house kicks, and I like the fundamental at 50 hertz, which is pretty damn close to the note of E. So I'm just tuning to that. Now, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're sending this oscillator fully to the mixer, and we also need to send our pitch envelope, off to our pitch envelope, our sine wave. So we'll send that, I don't know, like 3% or something like that. Now, as you can see, there we have two envelopes. We've got our pitch and we've got our amp envelope there. We'll start by playing with our pitch envelope. If you listen, so what we can do is we can play around with our pitch envelope here, and we can try and get somewhere a bit better at that. So It's really hard to control the Waldorf. It might just be me with this new Magic Mouse. I don't know if you've got an Apple and you've tried one, but it can be quite difficult to control. Now we'll just get this shape in a bit. I think we'll we can't really hear much there, so what we'll do is we'll play around this amp envelope now. Decay this with what I said, quite long, I'd say, because we want this as our bass wave. So we'll set it about there, and what we'll do is we'll set our shape. Say, I don't want to go too mad there. Just got to look at the general shape there. Try not to rely on numbers here, and just want to look at the general shape of what we want, because you can generally hear the shape as you see it. It's just being awkward now, this. That's and you can hear that now. Now if I was to change this shape obviously to something more extreme like that, you see, so it makes a big difference having these exponential envelopes. So it's very important that you have these when you're programming drum timbres, and any drum machine worth its salt will have them. It's not bad. I think what we need to do though is we need to get rid of some of the attack, because what we're doing is basically we're going to use this as the bass wave, the back end of the kick. So what we need to do is just remove some of that attack off it. Get that about there. Now that's not sounding bad. I think what we'll do is we'll play around with the filter. Yeah, obviously we've got a filter section here. I don't think I need to describe what a filter section is for you. What we'll do is I think we'll use a bell EQ on that, which will give us more of a maybe drop that down. You'll be able to hear how that's affecting. We'll get that up. I think basically we're pretty much there. We've got the. I think we might shorten this decay a little. It might be a little bit long, that. Try it there. Might be a little bit short. We'll just go a little bit longer, I think. Maybe increase the attack a little there. Attack on that. We don't really want a front end on this. You see, what we're doing is we're trying to remove the front end, because this is going to be the bass end of the kick, which sits at the rear. No, that's not bad. Now what we'll do there is I'll just close that, and what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to knock in a note. Obviously we've got quite a long note, because obviously we need to keep the entire decay, and if we did this as quite short we'd only catch the very front end. So we'll put that there. I'll just put another one in. Copy that to there just so we can get there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to copy this channel down. Those who use Logic will know this, but those who don't, all we're doing is we click this button and it copies that channel down with the exact same settings. Like that. Now what we're going to do now is we've created basically the bass end of our kick there. We'll modify that a little as we move along, but what we'll do is we want to move on to the body of our kick. For this, basically looking after creating the thud, the part that you're going to feel in your chest, and basically the part that can blow out candles from 50 paces away. So as I mentioned, the chest pounding energy produced by a kick is due to the frequency dominance or frequency gain, which is basically anywhere between 100 to 300. A fundamental laid along that path will determine the overall timbre of the kick. So this is where we need to be decisive or experiment. In our previous kick, I tuned it to E1, so that means I could tune this second kick to any note within a key that has E in it. For instance, C major also has E in it. I'll go for an easy one. C major has E in it, so I could tune this kick to C, D, E, F, G, A, or B, and basically it would remain harmonically in tune with the low end bass that we've just programmed. Now we have to do this. It's absolutely imperative that our layered kick that we're building here is harmonically associated. As I tune up the scale, the kick will become brighter, leaning more towards some genres of techno, whilst lower leans more towards house, and in the middle we have progressive, but I must remain in key. Now, what I've got for this one, the idea I've got in mind is, let's call this up, we've got a good heavy kick in mind, so we're going to remain with E1 for this. We're going to remain tuned to E1 basically. What we do is we send our pitch envelope here, we send that more. So what we do is we'll send that by quite a bit more. Now the more we send this to our pitch envelope, the more we change with the fundamental frequency will be. Hear that, because the reason is that this pitch here, as we send more of it, it goes higher in pitch and sweeps down it. The less we adjust this, so we don't go into negatives, the less we adjust this, the lower the frequency. So as we take this higher, say to about there, we can create that. Now, even though it's in the same key, we're just sending it more to the pitch envelope, which creates more of a sound. That basically, around there, let's say about 14% there. Now that's going to create a fundamental there, around 150 hertz. We'll set that on a low pass there. Right, envelope 1, what we're going to do is we're going to send that to a 0 attack, so we get a straight away, like that. And what we'll do is we'll take the decay to quite short, let's make 2.5, about there. So we get a sound more like that now. Now this one, we're going to send, what we're going to do is we're going to make this quite long. Now, you're probably wondering why we're going to do that. Now that's because the third kick we're going to put in, we're going to give it an immediate attack. And what we're doing is we're making sure that none of the envelopes, none of the transients, none of the hits happen at the same time. Because if they all happen at the same time, we're going to get something called phasing, and we're going to end up phasing our kicks. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have one on an immediate attack, one on an attack about there, and one on an attack about there. So just listen to that again. I think we'll play around with this decay. We'll just drop that down a bit. Oh, it's incredibly complex to control the Waldorf attack, I find. I think what we'll do is, what we'll do is we'll just pump up this drive. We don't want to go too mad here. It just adds a bit of overdrive to the signal. I mean, obviously, like I said, we don't want to go too crazy. Otherwise, we start hardcore. No, that's not sounding bad. What we'll do is play those two together now. Now we take one out. Hopefully you can see where we're going here, how we're layering instruments together and they're all being harmonically related, and we're building a kick up. This is how you construct all types of kicks. What we'll do again now is we'll copy this track down. And there we go again, and then we'll just copy this down to there. Let's rewind that. And we'll make sure we're calling up this attack. Now with this, we're going to produce the final part of the kick, the top end energy. Now this wants to contain most of its energy, anywhere between 300 to 800 hertz. But it's important to know that as I mentioned, it's entirely dependent on the music you're writing there. You may find that whilst mixing, you want to change that energy to 800 hertz, and you can just jump in and change this if you're using these attacks while you're programming your rhythms. Now, for this particular kick, as I mentioned, I want to do quite a deep house clubby type kick. So basically, we want the peak of our energy there at 300 hertz, because that's where that top end hit lies in your chest. It's the part that you feel you're being hit with. So what we're going to do is basically we're going to keep our oscillator set at E1. We're going to keep it on a sine wave, and I'm going to keep it sent at the same amount there, which again is going to give us a fundamental at 150. But this time we're going to roll that attack to nothing. So we've got that initial front end drive there. In fact, what we'll do is we'll set that drive up a little bit more. Oops, let's not go too much. We'll go hardcore with that. Now what we'll do is we'll adjust this. We'll bring this down. Let's say about there, just to give us that bite there, and we'll take the shape away. Hear that? Can you hear that? That's kind of thudding now. That's if this was on a PA now, your chest would be moving there. What we'll do as well is we'll set this around there, because we just want the front end here. We're just trying to create a front end. We'll leave that where that is. And that's just giving us a crack at the front end there. Now what we can do is we can increase the amount of energy there, the chest energy, by adding a second oscillator into the mix. Now what I'm going to do is I've got to stay in the same key as I've mentioned, so we can go all the way down to E1, but what I'm going to do is, staying in the same key, I'm going to go to A1. Now obviously that's in the same key as E, and it's in the same key as our other kicks. I can't stress enough that you must remain in the same key. So we are remaining in the same key there. And what we're going to do is we'll send that to the envelope by about 10%. And then we'll just bring that up. What we'll do is we'll drop that one down, we'll just kind of mix them both together there. Now, if you hear the difference that's made, what we might have to do is just turn that decay up a little. Oops, a bit too much there, I think. Might want to go a little bit shorter there. Let's try playing that back and have a listen what we've got. Now I'll just turn that up, just so you can feel the energy a little bit more. Now, could you feel that there? When I turned that up, did you feel that pounding in your ears? You could really feel the energy. Now, if you feel your headphones pounding like that, and I hope you are wearing headphones for this, if you feel them pounding like that, imagine what it'd be like on a PA system. So let's try that again. Now, if we start to take things away there, we've got our low end energy, we've got our mid end chest thud, and then we're just augmenting that with our top one, which is really giving it that oomph. Now, the kick is coming together now. If you have good monitors there, or hopefully headphones on, you can hear the energy of the kick. The bottom end's complementing the mid energy, which is then complementing the top end energy. Now, obviously, there we can jump between the three Waldorfs, or whatever synth you may be using, and adjust the parameters to sculpt the kick into whatever timbre we want. But the most important parameters to keep your eye on are the amp envelope parameters, because you've got to make sure that none of the attacks occur at the same time. You'll notice that when we were programming, we made sure that one had a long attack, one had a medium attack, and one has a fast attack. And that's just to ensure that the transients don't occur at the same time, because if they do, we'll introduce phasing, and that phasing will make mixing an absolute nightmare. Now, we can further adjust by playing around basically with our pitch envelope here, our pitch envelope decay and the shape. Now, for example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play that back, and that's powerful. That. Just turn that down a bit. Now I can change this, and what I can do is I'll just mute those out for now. You see how we can change the type of kit? We do the same here as well. Now we're not affecting the wave here, or the tuning, or anything else. All we're doing is playing around with our exponential envelopes and our decay parameters. And this is why I was suggesting at the very beginning that exponential is so important for programming drums, because we can suddenly turn from hardcore to house. Now what I want to do is I just want to set that back to as we had it, because I want to try and keep the same sound, because I want to bounce that down. I do like that sound. We'll bounce that down and use that. Just mute them and play that. Keep that around 50. We don't any shape on that. Yeah, that's it. There we go. Now, the largest contribution to a change in timbre in here now will be basically through our second Waldorf there. So I'll just close that and we'll open this Waldorf here. Now, if we want to make a major difference to this sound, this is the one to do, because this is our mid-end energy. Send that down a bit. So what we can do is, I mean, immediately, if we, for example, if we were to change this to a notch filter there, and we play around with the cutoff, can you hear the difference there? So this is the one that's going to produce the biggest differences. What we can do, we change that to, for example, a triangle wave, and oops, and we'll just open up this one. We'll change this one to a triangle wave. Immediately, we're a bit more hardcore there. It's not difficult at all to change timbres. It's just a few edits here and there, and you can make major changes. I think what we'll do is we'll just lengthen that a bit more. And I'd like to shorten that. So this one now sits in the middle rather than the bass wave. And we'll just call up that one. Now, this is probably an even better example. You can see the three different envelopes there. I'll just turn that up. Can you feel how that's rocking the headphones? That's certainly rocking mine, that. Now, when we have a kick timbre program like we have there, it's always worthwhile applying some processing. Now, I personally strongly recommend avoiding compression at this stage. Everyone bangs on and on about compression on drums, and yes, they do need compression, but in my opinion, only in the context of a full kit. Compressors are abused in dance music, I'll admit that, but everyone feels the need that they have to abuse them at every stage and land them on everything. And what it does is it usually ends up making your kick weaker and making the whole track fall apart. You've got to remember that synthesizers already have a compressed output, so if you start throwing compressors all over your kicks to try and add energy, what you'll end up doing is actually robbing it of dynamics, and you'll actually do more damage than good. The key with drums and compression is context. So avoid any heavy processing at this stage, because we'll apply that later. I will look at applying compression on drum loops in a later session. I'll squeeze it in somewhere. But for the moment, what we need to do is apply processing just to sculpt the drums a little so that we feel more happy with them. Now, the only processing I recommend at this stage is limited pretty much to the SPL rack pack, and more specifically the Transient Designer and the Twin Tube, and perhaps the Full Rangers. So what we'll do first of all is I'll just call up the Transient Designer. what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this obviously on the master output, because otherwise if I put it on one of these, we're going to be playing around for ages. So I'm going to throw the SPL on the master output. I'll call them all up first. I'll call up the transient designer, the twin tube, and the full range. We'll just lay them out so you can see them, and I can zoom in so you get an idea of what I'm doing. Now, I honestly don't think I need to go too much in depth with what these can do. I mean, basically, if we start playing it back, I can have more of a kick. I can take it away. I can have more sustain, so we get more of a dum at the end. Now, obviously, we could accomplish this with envelopes as well, but in the context of when you're working at building a loop, it's much easier to just jump in these if you need something immediate and play around. Now, we've also got the twin tube, which again, we can immediately change the timbre of the kick just by adding the processing there, and we can add harmonics, and actually there's a variety there that we can actually play with. That, you know, we can get a number of sounds just by playing with these three processors. Now we can use the full range here to further modify the kick, but if you're going to use this, try not to boost, because what you're going to do basically is increase the noise floor. Instead, you can generally boost by cutting frequencies around a specific point. Say, for example, we want to keep around 90. If we cut at 150 and at 40, 90 will automatically boost because we're cutting the frequencies around that energy. I'll just make that back up there. Now, I prefer using a graphic EQ like this rather than a parametric EQ, because you'll find that graphic EQs, they tend to give better results when you're programming timbres than parametric EQs will. A parametric EQ tends to be a bit too surgical, and when you're building a timbre, you want to be more general with it, and less surgical. Only become surgical when you come to mix down. I mean, of course, that's just my personal recommendation. You don't have to pay any attention to me if you don't want to. But as you can see, we can make massive differences by just using the full range, and it's quick and easy. And then we can add harmonics and saturation. Now that kick there is very different. If I turn these off from that kick there, now, I'm not going to sit here for the next 3 hours and show you how to peel orange, basically. It's not my job to do your job for you. I'm just here to put you on the starting grid. Remember that dance music evolves from you experimenting, not from copying someone else word for word. So what I'm going to do is, I'm basically going to leave synthesizing kicks there. I've shown you how to do it. I've shown you the ways that you can play with them and the processes you can use. It's now up to you to take that and experiment further. But one tip I am going to leave you with here on the kick front, which actually applies to all drum timbres actually, is if you hear a kick you like on a record, sample it and play it into an FFT. If you play a kick into an FFT here, you can copy the frequency response using drum synthesizers. Now, obviously, it may seem easy just to sample it and use the sample. But if you emulate a timbre by copying the frequency response on an FFT, you'll not only learn more about kick programming, and you should never underestimate experience on that count, but you'll have a complete set of editable parameters, much more powerful than sample editing will give you. You'll be able to really, really tweak it in depth, and more than that, you're avoiding any copyright problems. Anyway, the general approach I take is, what I'd do there now is I would sample that kick. I'd basically bounce that down and I'd sample it, and then I'd take these back on, I'd put them all back on again, and then I'd sample that again, and I'd use numerous processing options and play around with these for a good few hours. I'll play around with the Waldos for a good few hours and basically create myself a bank of kick samples. Now, once we've got this bank of kick samples, what I'd do is I'd import them into a drum synthesizer, and I've got a full bank of my own kicks in there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start this now. I'm going to bounce these down now. So what we're going to do is we'll fade out here while I start bouncing all these out, because I'm sure you don't want to sit here for the next 4 or 5 hours while I play around and start bouncing things down. So I'll bounce these down, and then we'll come back as soon as they're bounced. Up until this point, we've been layering our synthesized timbres together to produce huge kicks, and this isn't really a problem since we've always worked or ensured we're working within a specific key. Now, as I mentioned, whenever we work with kick drums, they do have a specific key, and it's incredibly important that the key of the song matches the key of the kick. But it's also important that if we layer kicks together, they must be in the same key, otherwise we can quickly end up with an absolute total mess, although at the time you're doing it, it may not seem that way. You see, the problem with kicks is that they have a massive amount of low-end energy that very few near-field monitors are going to replicate accurately, and as a result of that, it's easy to layer a load of kicks together that sound great in your headphones or on near fields, and you build up a mix around that and then start playing it out. And it's only once it actually hits a club, or if you're lucky enough, a good mastering engineer, that you realise the whole mix is a complete and utter mess, because, well, basically there's a massive amount of dissonance in the bottom end, so rather than thudding away like it should, it makes this strangest dissonant warbling sound, and you can believe me on that, because I've been there in the early years. Now, because of that, I personally don't recommend layering sample kicks. In my opinion, it's bad practice, and as I mentioned, it can introduce a host of problems. And I know some musicians and producers out there say that they layer kicks, and if you want to do that, it's absolutely fine. There's no rules to this game. It's just that I personally would recommend against it. What I will say, however, that is, if you plan on layering kicks, try to ensure you send your mix to a master engineer before you send it out to a club. And when I say master engineer, I mean a professional master engineer, not slip some so-called internet master engineer 50 quid and all he does is run it through T-Racks. A pro mastering engineer will have the full frequency monitors, and they'll let you know if you have dissonance at the bottom end. And believe me, it's much better that a mastering engineer tells you than you ruin your repertoire by finding out when it's played out in a club. Anyway, there are two ways you can layer the kicks, but the basic idea is to take the rear end of one kick and the front end of another and merge the two together. Now, you should always avoid just dropping one kick on top of the other, since the attack portions of both kicks can create phasing, and if this creates phasing on the bass end, it'll create serious problems for you. So what you do is you take the attack of one and sustain of the other, but if you do this, you should attempt to ensure that the samples you're using are in the same key. And attacking one key and releasing another key can play havoc with the rest of your mix. I mean, imagine if the attack was in one key and that key was in with your bass line, but your sustain of the kick wasn't. That would make quite an interesting dissonance there. I don't think it'd be interesting or enjoyable anyway to listen to. It might be interesting to hear. Now, the first way we can layer kicks is to basically open a sample editor or a waveform editor in your sequencer and basically cut the sustain off one kick and the attack off the other, and then basically use the envelopes to marry the two together, so we could fade in and out. Typically we could use a drum sample instrument such as they've all left me now, the Limplug's RMV Drum Addiction, there's one, and of course Native Instruments Battery. Doing that, you could place both portions of the kick on both pads and then jump between the two to adjust envelopes to make them kind of marry together, and then trigger two notes in your sequencer. Now, for me, that's quite a complex way of working, and I can't understand why people want to do that. But for me, an easier way to do that would be to basically just employ a transient designer. Obviously, as you can see there, I've got two kicks. I've got a front end and a rear end. Now, what I've got to do there is basically I've got to marry the two together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call up the SPL, the transient designers. We've got one up there, which is our first track, and then we'll call a second one up. There, which is on our second now. Basically, I want the attack of this first, but I don't want that attack there. Now, what I could do is I could just obviously grab that and move that back like that. But the result is well, it's not great. I'll just play that back. You heard that, I'll just turn that cycle on there. You can hear clickiness of it. And we've even cut the front end off that. It's not a great result. It's a lot of messing around and a lot of fading, but another way you can do it is basically just set the attack right off that using basically your SPL there, and then just force the attack on the first one there. So we get, and there you go. We've got no clicks, no clips. We've not had to mess around with envelopes for half an hour to try and get these right. And basically, we can adjust the sound further by just moving these. It's quite headache-inducing, that one then. And obviously, when we're there, we can go even further than this. We can do is we can call up our RSPO full ranger. Where is it? There it is. Oh, iLock key again. Yeah, it's there. There we go. It's a problem with the iLock keys that I find. Basically, we can call up a full ranger on it, and we can actually model this bottom end if we wanted to. We could. Now, there isn't much point putting one on the first one there because we wouldn't really want to model a front end of a kick. It's just the larger, longer waveform we want to model. And what we could do is we could call up our APEQ, and we can actually see where our frequencies are there. Now, we can see there's a lot of energy there, around 40, so we can dump in there and we can take that away. And now you can see we've got a massive energy now, more around 50 and 60 there, and then slowly dropping down there, and we can easily model our kick by playing around with these parameters, which totally changes the shape that we need. And basically that's it. That's a way that we can use the transient designers and the full ranges to design our kicks. Now, personally, I find that much easier than actually putting it in drum samplers and playing around with envelopes. But it's up to you. If you want to work that way, then of course you're free to work that way. I don't think I really need to open envelopes and show you how to use them. I would hope that you're already well versed in that, and if you're not, read the manual and have some experiments. Now, as mentioned earlier, the kick is an absolutely vital part of your music, so it is worth the additional time getting them right. I would fully recommend synthesizing them because you know what you're doing there. You know what basic waveforms you've got. You know how it'll gel together, and you know it'll be in key. But as I've said before, if you do hear a kick you like, rather than just stealing it, put it through an FFT and try to emulate the timbre on a drum synthesizer. Use your FFT to analyze it. And if you've seen the synthesis DVD, basically I taught you all the way through that what to look for in FFTs when you're building timbres and where to look. And at the end of that DVD, we did actually go back through and create some. So you can do exact same thing here. So what I think we'll do now is, I've shown you the kicks there, I've shown you how to make some kicks and the various methods you can do it. So what we'll do now is, we'll move on to the next session, and in there I think we'll have a quick look at designing some other drum timbres, such as snares and claps and general instruments like that, so you can see how drum synthesis works in that area too. So let's get on to the next session and have a quick look at that.